Hello, and welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is STEAM? STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the STEAM of Consciousness.
Welcome to STEAM of Consciousness. I'm George Koperna, and I'm really pleased to have Ipshita Banerjee with me today. And for all of you listeners, she's the one that suggested and put the little bug in my ear that I ought to have a podcast. So I'm really pleased to have her. She's an independent consultant. Ipshita, welcome.
Thank you so much, George, for having me here today. And I'm glad you started the podcast. It's very valuable.
I'm really pleased to have you today. Tell us a little bit. Independent consultants, a little bit vague. What do you do?
I basically tell stories. I would say that I first of all identify as a storyteller and a messenger who knows how to make a story land, and usually in context of something which would build value to the universe. That's a short story of what I do. But for the last 2 decades, I've actually multi-hatted. I have worked with foreign diplomatic missions in public affairs. I have worked in news and journalism early career. I've also worked at subnational government level, and you and I met at a carbon capture, utilization, and storage event through that. Currently, I'm helping multiple organizations. One, I'm helping an organization which works in hard-to-abate sectors, building a leadership voice and strategic communications as a full 360 degrees, not just amplification, but building the influence of how, while they transition from coal and steel, they kind of focus more and more on energy and climate and decarbonization. That's one thing. Two, I'm working with a not-for-profit which specializes in disability and championing more employment, especially for people who are struggling with disability in India and South Asia, and getting them a space and a voice and opportunities, which very often kind of gets overlooked or grazed over. And the third thing that I'm working on is I'm editing a solar report for an intergovernmental organization that's working with over 90 countries. So these are 3 things that I'm currently working on, and let's see how this goes.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a lot, and it's amazing that you're able to do such a broad set of things. And I think the conceit of this podcast is to talk about your journey, and I think it's really interesting to go back in time. I call it stepping in my Wayback Machine. And going back in time to, when you were in, the modern high school for girls in India, were you thinking this is what you were going to be doing? What did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a very, very good question. Unlike a lot of young women in India who get to grapple with identity and are handed down information about what their role in the society is, I came from a family of botanists. So as a child growing up in India, I got to learn sustainability and energy and decarbonization and, the greenhouse gas emission. These were conversations that were happening at dinner tables. But a 9-year-old Ipshita understood that science wasn't one of her strong suits, especially mathematics. I struggled. And while I did have great interest in environmental sciences, without mathematics, that wasn't a pathway that I could take and move forward with. A 16-year-old Ipshita got a sense of understanding how weather patterns are changing in our city. Cyclones were regular, storms were regular, rising sea levels were causing issues in the mangrove plantations of India, in east of India, where I come from, in Kolkata. So I was getting a better sense of what was going on. And I thought perhaps studying law would give me an understanding of how to, from a human interest standpoint, address this better. I didn't end up going to law college. I ended up studying English literature at the end of high school at 18. And alongside English literature, my minors at undergrad were political science and sociology. I also realized that probably being the fourth estate and being a journalist would give me that stronger voice to build the change and build the value that I was thinking about building. So I then did an advanced course in media management. But within 4 years, the first 4 years of my career, when I worked in television, print, and also a little bit in publishing, I understood that the power centers would not be moved, or the needle could not be moved as successfully in journalism as one would be able to do it working in policy. And that's where I joined the US State Department through a diplomatic mission in Kolkata, West Bengal. But that's another story. But yeah, little Ipshita did not really plan to be in strategic communications and public affairs.
And that's the whole point. And let's kind of look at each of those components just a little bit briefly. So you went to school to be a lawyer initially. Is that the case, or did you decide on English literature before enrolling in advanced school?
So I did initially get admission to a law school in India. However, because political challenges was very rampant in east of India, my school graduation results came after almost towards the end of the first semester of the undergraduate degree in law, which is a 4 years course. So I was told that I would probably not be able to pursue it, given that I wouldn't be able to hold a seat till my results come out. At this point, I kind of lost heart a little bit, and I came back to my hometown from Pune to Calcutta and decided that I would do an undergraduate degree in English literature, which, while people think is one subject, is a conglomeration of philosophy, of society, of gender, of politics, and then studied, two more subjects in association, which is sociology and political science. At that point, I thought that being journalist would make a lot of sense. And that's when I took an advanced degree in media management with a specialization in journalism from New Delhi.
And the switch to political science as a minor, that makes perfect sense and aligns with how an engineer me would think of law and poli sci. But what attracted you about English literature? Was it the diversity of the subtopics? Was it you read Chaucer and were excited by it, or what was it?
Um, I wouldn't say I was excited by Chaucer, but I was definitely excited by the interplay of literature, music, language, poetry, politics, and society. So all the way from Shakespeare to Jane Austen, and then the movement from Jane Austen to Maya Angelou, it actually showcases more about our limiting beliefs, our societal understandings, what's happening politically at that point, geopolitically, when the war hits you. So I think that kind of opened up my mind, sitting in a small city called Calcutta, which was, for those who do not know, the empire's capital back in the colonial regime, and has lived in a sort of Edwardian twilight for over 50 years. So slow life, slow living, still understanding hierarchies in a sense that doesn't exist. The society moves from far left to far right. So challenges emerged there in a way that wouldn't have enabled me the imagination that literature enabled me with. I think that was the wing beneath my wings, the wind beneath my wings. And that kind of told me that there is a larger world where you're kind of a speck in it, and you'll be able to make a difference only if you kind of have your values, your integrity, and your North Star in place. And I very quickly realized that sustainability was one of those North Stars.
And I think you spoke so eloquently and passionately on this topic. I'm ready to go back and do some English literature. But really, that's why one of the reasons why we have STEAM and not STEM, right? That arts part of it, it's inextricably linked across the continuum. And I think you emoted that very well. Thank you. And you talked, we're jump ahead a little bit, but you talked a little bit about, well, that's always the thing that your parents do. Okay, so you get an English literature degree. What are you going to do with that as a career? Are you going to teach English? And you hinted that you decided journalism might be the way to go. And was that the thought process early on, or were you deciding that as you moved through your English literature degree process?
While I was moving through my English literature degree process, I was considering a couple of options. One of them was to understand the best pathway to influence policy. And I understood that the fourth estate would have a power and the capacity to influence policy. Television journalism, and we're talking about 2001 to the 2005 period. The television journalism, especially with national news networks and going beyond with international news networks coming into the country, was happening at that point. So there were collaborations with BBC, NDTV was the first English news channel, CNN collaborated and built a news network in India at that time. So the transition was happening out of the staid national radio, television, print journalism to a larger spectrum. I knew that while I was multilingual, speaking Hindi, Bengali, English, and most people in India are slightly multilingual. I also spoke a couple of other languages and understood languages like Telugu a little bit, Gujarati a little bit, Punjabi a little bit. I understood my strongest suite was obviously staying with the English language, where I can emote accurately, influence purposefully, and build a dynamic of telling the story. So I thought journalism was my path then, and straight out of my advanced degree, where I learned radio, social media, which was then called new media, and television and print. I kind of got my first job with CNN's network called CNN IBN with Network 18, and which was still a startup, and started my news career there. I followed through working in publishing. You must have heard of Random House. It was Penguin Publishers back in the day. And I was working on their travel guides. And then I moved into working with Telegraph, which is the largest circulated print media in east of India. So I worked with a couple of newspaper spaces, but I have always been a very curious individual who wants to see the whole story and zoom out a little bit and see the larger picture. So staying with one model is not something that gives me that foresight. And therefore, this is who I am.
No, and I think that you talked about a lot of jumps from position to position to kind of, you know, maybe achieve that whole perspective that you're searching for. And so, moving from print media to visual media, or as you said, adding in new media, and unfortunately, my haircut belies the fact that I remember Penguin Books and I remember all of those other print media companies. What did you really take away from that? Was getting those segments able to help you see a larger picture? Was it to help guide you in ultimately next steps and where your passions may be? What did you take from that? Let's call it a mini journey.
Well, I had a moment of epiphany. And this is a very interesting story. This is back in 2011, January. I was waiting outside the hotel room of Priyanka Chopra. I
Mm.
guess I would be the first speaker who would come in and talk about Priyanka Chopra here. But I was waiting outside her room to interview her. It was 2 in the morning. My son was at that time 10 months old. And obviously, there were multiple things tugging at my soul simultaneously. Yes, I should have this interview. I should file this because her new movie's out. Two, I should go back home, make sure that I feed my son. And three, I should also be responsibly ensuring that this is like the headline story in tomorrow's newspaper. So, with all of that playing out, the question that I grappled with the most at that point is, what am I actually doing? Why am I here? Why am I interviewing Priyanka Chopra? Is this what I set out to do? And my heart gave me an answer. It was, yes, I have learned the lessons that I had to learn, wearing the hats of journalism, understanding publishing, editing, proofreading, and also getting a sense of asking the right questions. But have I asked myself the same question? And the answer was no, this is not what I want to do at all. So at that very moment, I thought that there are a couple of options that I could explore where I would be able to help um, work with the people in the planet from a larger space. So I zoomed out. And right before the interview, I was thinking that I'm going to apply for the embassies and the consulates where actually there's funding and grant to help the people. There's actually various policy issues that one is talking with. I can work from everything on energy and climate to anti-trafficking and learn that with motivation as to how to mobilize people to people connections and networks. Um, and let me kind of take a pause and probably not move forward with journalism. Because of the insecurity of the profession, because I started out working on feature stories and covering natural disasters. But here I was trying to capture the essence of a movie and
Mhm.
why a celebrity. And I have interviewed quite a few celebrities, but that's for another topic and another time. But am I actually being uh, honest to what my calling is? And my why question told me that obviously I was feeling myself, not my career, but perhaps feeling myself a little more hard.
And that introspection drove you, and you
Absolutely.
went into a number of positions that you talked about. I believe was it the U.S. Embassy, the
So
first
the
one?
first the first job I applied for, and that was the following month actually, on my son's birthday, I
Oh,
I sat yeah, his first birthday, I sat for the US Consulate Kolkata position for a media advisor's role within the public affairs section. Now, for those who do not know what this means is you have to manage media and communications for all of Northeast of India, which is 11 states, plus understand the geopolitics and dialogues that US as top line messages is trying to have in its engagements, whether that's in education, energy, climate, trafficking, trying to understand where, CDC is trying to work with certain states which are not doing so well. all of that work, plus the grants and special projects that are being driven by, at that time it was called the R Fund. So Secretary of State would be driving the grants, and they would be called the R funds, or the this is, what the government wants. And this is during the Obama 2.0 administration. This is 2011 when Obama's in his term, and we are trying to see how digitization is going to work out. So I applied for this first job. I got through, and I started a completely new journey from being somebody who was telling the story to someone who was shaping the narrative and trying to build a larger conversation.
In some ways, I can see that continuum, right? It's you, the basics that you learned through your journalism journey. And now you can apply them in a way to communicate, and that's really what we always want to do, whether you're an engineer or a geoscientist or any other kind of mathematician, communicating their results to people. And how how seamless was that transition for you? Did you feel that you had that base, or did they throw you in and you're like, what am I going to do?
No, I felt like, it's like every job when you're thrown into the deep end,
Hmm.
you hit the road running. Newsroom trains you to be resilient. So the newsroom, and you may have seen a lot of these newsroom shows where you see all the challenges that one is, and all the egos and all the personalities that you're dealing with. Working in public affairs is very similar in many ways. One, of course, you're trying to work with people who have a process driven mindset of certain things that have been done in a certain way. But with the Obama administration, all of that was changing. So I think it was very enabling to be working with some very strong diplomats at that point. I think I got to write speeches, remarks, handle the digital for somebody as fantastic as Richard Varma, who heads MasterCard at this point and also worked as an assistant secretary and before that as ambassador to India. I got to work with Nisha Biswal, who worked for South Asia and Southeast Asia. So there were leaders who were part of a transition and part of a conversation where a lot of new was happening. So me being new and them trying to have a new dialogue as the most strategic and sustained partnership of 21st century with US and India, I think it all converged. And of course, you brought up a very good point about the training. So when you get training in the newsroom, you're writing those breaking news, the Astons and Supers, alongside asking the right questions. So we would have things like the murder board, where you're trying to brief the ambassadors or leadership, telling them about these are your speeches and remarks. And if asked hard questions, these are what you talk about. Now, you've already done that as a journalist. Then you get to write those top line messages, which are similar to those Astons and Supers, and Twitter's coming around with 140 characters, and you already know how to write in 140 characters if required. You also have to report back on budgeting and funding and how the programmatic evolutions are happening. You've already managed that budget at a publishing house, dealing with everybody from a cartographer to an author sitting in Estonia, trying to figure out why his map of or the architecture of a certain institutional building and your understanding of that architecture as someone who's going to share it with lay people from different countries is not going to be aligned. You also understand diplomacy a little better. When you're multilingual and speaking with countries like Bangladesh, which have the same language, understanding of Nepal, who have similar dialectical and cultural understandings. You're learning as somebody who studied English literature, and literature, political science, and sociology comes together because now you understand people and culture. But what is very important through all of that is staying with empathy and building those people to people networks where there is a trust for larger social change that happens, because US and India did not have a very similar relationship for a very long time. And I'm talking about 2011 to 2017 when I was at the embassy, which was perhaps among the most thriving partnerships that we've been able to build. Um, I guess things tied in and loose ends were kind of worked on. I did grapple with certain new things, like grants is something that I had never managed before, but I had to take in grants training, and I realized the value of, and I understood as journalists, people don't really get adequate training. So building grants on helping journalists understand climate education from a larger global perception, emerging markets, development sector as a whole was something that I was able to build through very tough times when journalists were being critically harassed and in a lot of South Asian countries, and build an alumni network, which kind of through no paid media, no partnership, organically told the stories that we were trying to push through.
And that's I think you've talked about the base that you built in journalism now, then you started shaping the narrative. When did you realize that you wanted to be part of the narrative in some of the more issues driven work that you've done? Was it during that 6 years you're like, hey, I now know how to do this? Can I plug it in? When did that epiphany come to you?
That was also an epiphanic moment. So I had applied to be part of COP22, the second COP, to work with climate advisor and special climate envoy Kerry's team. The Bureau of Oceans selected me to go into Marrakesh, Morocco, and work in COP22 and tell the story from the US Press Center about all of the events that were happening at the center. That's when I think energy and climate and the importance of it, you were working with the NASA folks, talking about the heat maps and the temperature moderations. You were working with NREL, and they are talking about from the engineering side, there are tools that could help you actually monitor and measure the carbon footprints that you have on the environment. So my whole perception of what climate and energy looks like sorry, this is the pollution in Delhi, so this often happens. Give me just a moment, I'll drink some water. So my whole perception of what climate and energy and their linkages with agriculture, carbon, sustainability, and food security, and then how that kind of reflects on bringing in renewable to South Asia and how that would work, how utilities are kind of dealing with their crisis of challenges, actually, of their customers transitioning to more digitization and mapping their customer centricity. So understanding all of this from the US standpoint, as well as visiting the various countries who had presence at COP22, it opened up a completely new avenue of understanding for me. And I think that's when I truly started believing that sustainability is what I want to work in, although the lens was still not as deep focused as it is now.
And I think your journey to get that light at least directing you. I mean, these things don't happen right away, and so it's really interesting how to me how each of those steps help that light get a little bit brighter for you and show you the path. Um, I think there's a couple things that I'd like to talk about. You talk a little bit about some of the other issues. The women's issues, the equality work, is that also born of this same passion?
I think the women's issue is, let me take a step back. I think human beings are a sum total of the experiences they have, the people they meet, and the context that they kind of find themselves in. I think women's issue is something that I focused on right from my early life, something that I understood in biases that my country, as well as South Asia as a whole, kind of dealt with. However, being able to champion it happened much later. It's only through grants that I could have access through at the US Department of State, and later on working with United States Energy Association, where I fought tooth and nail on working on women's issues. Being in a deeply male-dominated sector, as you're aware of, I think energy, and I started working in energy only in 2019 holistically, when I joined an energy efficiency organization. So from 2019 on, I realized that the representation of women in South Asia is between 17% to about 22%. So trying to get access to as many grants or RFPs as possible, applying for those funding, trying to develop women from middle management to senior leadership, also working on a global charter that I did working at S.T.E.A. in 2022, is something that I kind of feel very grateful for. I think thinking about an issue and caring about an issue has only that much value till you have the funding for the issue. So I think in 2022, when I got the opportunity to apply for a State Department funding for a $10 million Women in Energy project, where Southeast Asian women, as well as women from Fiji and Suva, were being trained in leadership, having more voice at the table, also in their sectoral focus, because they have limited scope of access to European and US leaders. USEA had this model where you would have volunteers who would help train these women. So taking them in for those trainings and building those workshops and then building their mentor-mentee connects is what I found deeply gratifying. And that's when I got to work a little more on women's issues. The other thing that I did is whether I was working on policy like carbon capture and helping the government of India, who, as you know, got a lot of help in capacity and understanding CCUS from the US government early on before they came up with the policy. At every programmatic level, having women's representation so that they have access to the same knowledge as men in equal footing is something that I have tried through my career, but more so over the last 7 years of working in energy and climate.
No, and your passion for this issue comes through, and I wanted to make sure we brought it up and discussed it. And thank you. I like to tell this story. You know, my daughter went to college, to university here in the U.S. and said she wanted to be an actor, and so as her mom and dad are both engineers, we said fine, and she went off, and after a semester, she had all A's and said, I hate it. I want to be an engineer. Don't hate me. And she ended up graduating with her engineering degree. And so we couldn't be prouder. You know, we always supported her either way. But I always think that, you know, years and years ago, she would have said, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be, which are very noble professions. But the fact that she sees other women being engineers, being leaders in industry, or geoscientists or mathematicians or whatever, you know, I think opening those doors is an incredibly powerful and important thing to do. So thank you for your work in this area.
There's one thing that I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
While because it's come up several times while working with engineers and geoscientists and people who work in several, associated fields. The question that I often get asked is, why is it important to communicate? I think when people research and when people get into the weeds of writing those papers, trying to see if a certain technology works or not, try to champion a certain sector, they often forget that the larger audience and their various stakeholders, whether it's government, whether it's private sector players, the intergovernmental organizations, not everybody has the time to read a 40-page, 70-page white paper. It's very important to understand the different platforms through which, and map the stakeholders and understand the different modes through which you can speak to them in a language that they could comprehend. And two, it's also important to kind of make things more palatable and bite-sized. in a world where everybody has a 7-second attention span. So whether that is through social media, whether that's through messaging networks, whether that is fact sheets, toolkits, and all the other cool things that we do with shorter videos and podcasts, it's important to understand that getting a communicator in early on to shape the narrative and not just tell your story as an afterthought. Plan for crisis when things don't go your way, and also try to build those bridges through dialogue with policymakers and regulators. I think whether that's a PowerPoint presentation or whether that's that telephone communication where you're telling them, okay, this is what I'm championing and this is where our alignments are. I think the communicator or the public affairs leader, or even if it's like, making the larger podcasts and the learning about energy and capacity building programs, that's where a public affairs person kind of sees how to zoom out and see the bigger picture. So I wanted to answer that why question of why it is important to have people from other allied fields and why it's important to have that A in the stream of consciousness.
No, perfect. It was honestly my next question, the power of communication. And so I appreciate you bringing it forward. I think the interesting thing, you can relate to any technologist, whoever it may be. They can do the best work in the world, but if they can't communicate that work, it doesn't come across the same way. And one follow-up question on that, and I think with the movement through the use of AI or chat GPT, I mean, how are you seeing this change how people communicate, particularly with trying to shrink very complex things down? Have you dealt any at all with that?
I think I'll start with quoting Charles Dickens here. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times.
Yes.
So I think I have been successfully using multiple AI tools and trying to learn AI tools. Of course, the more basic ones like ChatGPT and OpenAI with Canva and Perplexity on one hand, but also trying to understand how people are engaging with content, with AI pushing a certain content forward and kind of silencing a certain other content, depending on the geography that you live in, depending whether you are male or female, what is your alignment, what is your purchase pattern, what age, what gender, whole bunch of, it's a full gamut. The challenge in here is it does kind of have a tendency to choose the already chosen. And that helps one kind of build a new kind of silo where all conversations are happening in a certain sort of echo chamber. For instance, when you send out a podcast, um, the presumption for AI would be that people who come in from a science technology background is interested in your podcast. The reality, however, is that it is for a much larger audience, an audience who wants to understand about new things, is curious, and is trying to build their learning curve in career and trying to make the same decisions that we have grappled with as to what should my career look like. If I've studied humanities, is it okay to champion science? I think that's one. The advantage, however, is that I think the challenge of language barrier and geographical barrier has gotten far removed. You can close caption an entire podcast. You can translate or transliterate an engagement. You can also use AI to write for you when you run out of time and don't have an intern. So it does help people in a time crunch whose priority area is not communications, but other things. It also, I think, has helped um, bring in a dialogue between underserved communities who, of course, pay the price of not understanding AI. But if we can build capacity of AI so that we help communities who are in far off states or far off parts of the world I'll give you an example. I was in Medellin, Colombia, about in 2024, around March, where we were working on a waste to energy training on hydrogen for women from EPMA, from people from Cosmonai Gas. So there were people from 11 countries who had come together. And the entire training was about visiting sites, capacity development on energy, understanding how energy systems help with transmission and distribution lines, cybersecurity awareness, and all of that. I snuck in a 1 hour session on one elevator pitch and understanding generative AI and communications and how these women could benefit from it. Now, I can tell you safely that the kind of response I received from these 11 countries, from Kenya to Kazakhstan to Colombia and Honduras and others, was remarkable. We were working the entire time through two translators with headsets, and I was speaking in English, and these are people who communicate in different languages. The AI divide disappeared. Them understanding how to be able to tell their own stories, being able to be on their own LinkedIn's, being able to be on their own social media platforms with the help of AI and generative AI and very basic things using Canva and others. It really helped them. And 1 year later, as I speak to them, of those 24 women, about 7 women have advanced in their careers. And one of the things they told me on a call was because now they know and they're not uncomfortable and scared of the internet anymore. And now they can actually, through AI generative channels, be able to quickly translate and ask a question to the other women in the network who speak other languages and be able to get a quick solution to a technical problem.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, and your perspective as well. And I have one more question for you, and it's an easy one. What advice would you give to young people out there looking to explore anything in this STEAM universe?
I think my first advice would be um, don't go by trend mapping of your career. Is it popular to be an engineer? Is it popular to be a lawyer? We don't no longer live in a world where it's one subject or the other. Choose a career path that kind of matches your core values or core ideologies of what you want to see shaping up in the planet and how you want to impact lives of people. If your goal is to make money, then think about how your individual brand could work in business development to just make money no matter what your career path is. So don't limit yourself by what standards the society or the trends are setting. Two, always know that nobody has it all figured out. Everybody is trying to shape their career through lessons that they learn and networks that they build. So build very strong networks because in a world so divided and as well as connected, your networks will help you perhaps make that decision in your career which you haven't made yet, or get that promotion that you were eyeing for a while. And three, try to usually be centrist in your thought process. Alignments with any political, sociological, or religious belief is great, but taking it to work can sometimes be an impediment when you're working with the larger world as an audience, or if you're working with multiple people. So trust and respect people for what they stand for and what value they bring to the work that you're doing. So yeah, these are three things that I would say would help anyone do well in their career, no matter where they stand today. And yeah, this too shall pass. So go for it and build what you have to build. And I would love to hear all of those stories at some point.
And we really, really thank you for your time today. This has been fantastic. Again,
Thank you.
you helped plant the bug in my ear, and I want to formally say so and thank you once more. This has been a presentation of the ARI Podcasting Network. I'd like to thank Ryan Kessler for producing this, and most importantly, Ipshita Banerjee, for being our guest today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George and Brian.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness, available on your preferred podcast listening station.